This is the Black Rose. This is the start of the entire project and where the project stemmed from.
While travelling on a road trip through Victoria, I was approached by a man who appeared somewhat out of the blue near the motel room where we were staying. He gave me a cutting of a plant to take home with me. Even though I said we wouldn't be home for weeks, he said it didn't matter. Just plant it when you get home and it will grow. He then announced this plant as the Black Rose. As a result, an intertwined and seemingly connected series of events started to take place. I started to record these events and narratives in photographs and diaries.
Two years later, for some reason, as this plant was growing out the backyard, I looked up the meaning. I don't know why I hadn't done it before, but symbolically the Black Rose suggests death or the overcoming of a long journey. It's also the search for absolute perfection, and it's also referred to as black magic. And I realised then that this old man was right. This plant was meant for me and this project. The Black Rose is the culmination of 7 years' work. It started with a single line to a friend about the possibility of doing a project on the theme of home. Little did I know that 7 years later I would end up with hundreds of written stories, thousands of photographs and 14 books which dissected basically my entire life. It's everything I've learned in photography. It's every life experience that I've had growing up from when I was young in Newcastle to where I am right now. It's every click of the shutter that I've ever taken, which is hundreds of thousands over time, has been building to this point.
Trent is part of an ongoing lineage in Australian art. He's a narrator. He's a storyteller, and this exhibition is a new chapter in how Australian artists tell the story about their lives, and in doing so tell the stories about our place in the world.
So Trent is the first Australian fully sort of signed up member of Magnum, which remains, not only the most famous photojournalist agency, it was the first. It was Cartier-Bresson who advised Robert Capa to call himself a photojournalist. Magnum is the crucible of photojournalism. It's the agency which really defined our idea of what photojournalism might be. It seemed to me that there was still this kind of undiscovered photographic continent lying in wait for someone like Trent Parke, and as I understand it, that's what he was up to in minutes to midnight, travelling over the continent at a very specific moment in time.
I wanted to, at the time when I was doing Minutes to Midnight, document the emotional state of the country. Not what it physically looked like, but actually what it felt to be living in that era, at that point of time. And this transition in the, not just from Australia, but the whole world. That's what Minutes to Midnight for me was about.
It's in the wake of the Bali bombings. It's after this. It's in the midst of this, the worst drought, if I understand it, in Australian history. So it's, you could say it's a dark, it's a kind of semi-apocalyptic time. But then, of course, what he's finding there is stuff that's been defining the nature of the outback or the continent for a very long time. I always think of that Ezra Pound's definition of literature. Literature is news that stays news. Think, can we transfer that kind of definition across from literature to photography? And it seems we can in the case of Trent Parke.
This new body of work just continues on. It's just like the next volume in the Trent Parke story. He looks at how life for him unfolds, and as he gets older, as his family grows, as the relationship with his wife builds, the next chapter gives you the next edition.
The way it is underwater like that, and it's rippling back and forth across it, and it has those bubbles, it really feels like the face is, the person is almost coming up from underwater.
Yeah.
On the very first day of the project on home, we'd locked the keys in the house. And so this is what the house saw. This is me trying to get through the cat flap and open the laundry door. What the house saw. Rakes, cricket bats, hose, everything we tried. Then I eventually rang a locksmith and he came within 1 minute and... Chance, fate, coincidence, all those sorts of things. From the very moment the project began, it's played its part. The project on home, the way it started, I had no idea where it would lead. I was actually thinking more that it was going to be about Adelaide and this new home that I was in. But you cannot escape the memories and the past because that's what's inherent in storytelling, and eventually that's where it led back to.
I think for both of us, moving to Adelaide gave us that quiet time, that room in our heads to actually say what we wanted to say, and perhaps it wasn't what we'd done before.
Oh, good ball.
The children changed the way we worked, and
Come on, Jim, hurry up.
And it gave us the option or the freedom to actually pursue some investigations, I guess, into photography. And try other ways of telling a story.
Kids come along and then you start to relive childhood because you start looking at them and how they're growing up, how you interact in being a parent, and that starts to bring back things of your childhood. And it was that point, I think, where I started to look back and try and get some of those memories back that I'd blanked out.
And I think for him, losing his mother when he was, a teenager, was something he didn't want to deal with back then. But as an adult and as a father, and perhaps wondering what that would be like from his children's point of view, it started a bubbling inside of him.
I only have one memory of Mum, and that's... She was calling out to me from the bedroom, and I was kind of thinking, why do I need to get up? I'm the oldest, I have to do everything. And so I went into Mum, and she was having a really bad asthma attack. And she said, run. Go and get the doctor up the road. And so I remember just running. I got the doctor, and when I come back down, Mum was on the hallway floor. And she turned all blue. I remember the neighbour's arm going around Mummy and just being taken away. And that was it. And that was the only memory I have.
The next day, I got the boys together and I told the three boys, basically said, well, we have to get on with it by ourselves now. Your mum's gone and I'll have to look after you, that's it.
So in our house, we never talked about mum. It was taboo. The photos went down the day after she died. Nobody discussed her.
When I first saw a picture of my mother, when I was in my teens, I didn't know who it was. And I didn't have any connection to that picture at all. Like, I looked at it and was like, who is it? I had to ask, who's this woman in this photograph?
You know, Mum was cremated and you know, her ashes were thrown to the wind and we never really spoke about it after that. It was, you know, it was a house full of boys and we were, you know, growing up, I don't know, I didn't ever want to talk about it. It wasn't Dad's fault or anything. I didn't want to go there. I didn't want to know anything about it. But the problem, I guess, was that, you know, for years later and even to now, there was kind of nowhere to go. There was no grave, there was nothing.
Trent can't remember anything about his childhood, so he's probably blocked everything from that day. He can remember his mates, but not too much about anything else of his early life even.
When I travel back home to Newcastle to visit the family these days, I usually find myself ending up in the same place. I find myself sitting alone on the top of the same hill. It's never been a conscious decision. I follow my heart, not my head. The hill overlooks all of Newcastle, the entire city, the harbour, the suburbs, and remaining bush. Years later, I found out there was a hospital at the bottom of this hill. It was where my mum gave birth to me. It's where my life began.
You know, I used to sit in my bedroom and, you know, after Mum died, and I would sit in the bedroom in Newcastle and just, it was always questioning everything. Why are we here? What's happening to us next? Because I knew what is going to eventually happen. There was only one certain thing, and I'd seen that. And I guess that's how I've lived my life. You know, time always chasing you down.
My mother did encourage us to be artistic, but I think we became artists when she died, is really what I have always thought, because I think we all had actually something to say all of a sudden. So I did theatre, and Grant drew, and Trent took photographs, and we were good at it, but I think we sort of became compelled by it when we had something to say that we couldn't say in our house.
Because Mum had the darkroom there, so, you know, when Mum died, I immediately picked up the camera and started taking photographs. So I'd already been taking photographs and working out what I was doing for several years before I then took photography at school. This is the thing that really hooked me into photography when I was young, around the age of 10, 12. It was seeing this image come up in the tray for the first time, like so many other photographers, that it was like magic. And since that day, I've been seeing it ever since.
Trent started his career as a professional cricketer and then made his way to photojournalism. It's quite an interesting training ground because you are aware of what actually happens on the field when you're trying to capture it. So there were some really interesting insights that he had from the very beginning, and he said to me, I was always looking for the shot that no one else had.
When he first rang me up and told me that he had won the black and white Olympic sports competition, he rang me and told me, and I said, that's amazing. I said, is that for Australia? He said, no, that's the world. I said, that is absolutely the world. That your photo gets picked out of the world. That's incredible. And then, of course, the next year and the next year, he did the same.
Whenever anything good has always happened to me, whenever, you know, by chance or coincidence, luck has shined on me in some way. All the mothers and so forth, as I've always growing up, would always say, that's your mum looking over you. And I'd always go, yeah, that's my mum looking over me. It's one of those things that it makes you, you know, as a kid, I guess, feel good. But I never had any real substance to that line.
So once we had the children, we went on a number of road trips. We had a big one where we were actually homeless, where we were in between homes. We decided we'd go up north and travel. We experienced it better, I think, with the children because we were at places longer, so we saw the change of light, we saw the different animals that visited a waterhole. So for Trent, I think this really enhanced what he was already going through, but he started seeing the country with new eyes.
It's about juxtaposing the micro with the macro very much throughout the entire show, showing how a Jats cracker with ants on it, with millions of ants, juxtaposed with the landscape of the Nullarbor, how small everything can be, but how big a place it can have. That's very much part of this exhibition.
He photographs the world that's out there, but imbues it with his personal vision. There is that incredible visual intensity to his work, and it achieves this kind of often hallucinatory or just very, very brooding kind of quality. And I guess this brings us back to the idea that he's photographing stuff that's out there in the world, but there's a very, very strong autobiographical, personal dimension to it, not just in the style, but I think in the subject matter too.
For Trent, for the most part of this, is a passage of time. There's a heartbeat going through this work. So I think, you know, if you actually stop and listen to what's going around you and watch what's happening, there's a lot of analogies you can bring in. You know, he was super aware of that at the time, I think, and so, you know, he would see things perhaps where other people wouldn't.
So the squid starts off, it's you know, a very small portion of a squid that has already died and its cells blocking up under the intense light. And so it starts off with almost nothing, but for me it was almost like the Big Bang, the creation of time, and the pulsing of those dots, like life being born and extinguished. There's this rippling that's like breath that goes through it as well, and breathing. And so that breath then relates back to asthma, and Mum having that asthma attack, and how obviously important breath is. And there's a series of me going out to a sea lion that I can see in the ocean, and I'm paddling out to this sea lion, and as this sea lion's going across, its head goes under and then it comes up. As I get closer and closer, it goes under and it comes up. It's about breath and breathing and life.
He's not just capturing a moment in time, he's capturing an emotion. That's why these pictures are pushed to a new place. They go beyond just capturing or describing a scene. They now have moved on to capturing the essence or the emotions or a feeling, and that's the potency of Trent Parke's photography now.
And so the entire time while I was making the Black Rose, it was very much about suburbia and the beach and the bush and being those days. But I hadn't actually been back on the street corner for 6 years, and I was wanting to go back and make a body of work on the street corner. But it's always how do I take it to a different place? And it was actually the catalyst of the dirt swirls, of taking this dirt from the garden and swirling it around on these whiteboards and forming these images which were of people as well, that then gave me the idea to go to the street corner and try this sort of technique, this grain that was there. And that came about also from recording dreams, and how when I started actually writing down my dreams during this whole project, you can't ever quite grasp the outline of someone in a dream. It's always there, but it's not sharp.
So as the pedestrian light flashes red and the pedestrians start to line up on the opposite side of the corner, that's when I hit the cable release and the camera will just continually fire off. A shot like this for a year, every day at rush hour between 4 and 5 o'clock. Printed about 1,200 portraits, I think, in the end, hundreds of rolls of film. And it was really interesting to see that sort of dynamic and the different type of people and so forth who inhabit this corner. And on a daily basis, I'd find that the same people would turn up at the exact same time of day and stand in the exact same position. I got to kind of know the regulars and
he is there, but he's also invisible. He's also more an observer than a participant. And he wants to capture the essence, the unscripted, the things that you can't predict or plan. That's what he's aiming to achieve in his photographs.
And that was kind of what I was after with these street pictures. This person that might be standing beside you one day and then the next day, but then 3 days later, there's that same person. And you just grabs a fleeting moment of them. And I guess that's what the Black Rose and what I've been trying to do is all about, that transient nature of the street, but indeed life itself. And you're here 1 minute and gone the next.
Imagination is the key to the whole Black Rose. It's the most important thing. Imagination is always so important to me. And dreams allow you to get to those places that you can't get to in your normal day-to-day working. They open up things that you could never possibly think of. I had this dream, the trees, the big gum trees that are everywhere in our backyard were falling one by one, and they were just missing me. And I was standing there thinking, boy, that was lucky. And it was just on dusk, that period where the light was just disappearing from the sky, and there was sort of that desaturated sky. And I climbed up on one of the trees and I saw Dad, and he had a very puzzled expression on his face, and he pushed the last tree and it fell towards me. And again, it just missed me. And then I looked up into the sky, and all the insects and the birds and everything that was in those trees were all just hovering. And it was only a day later that I thought, I have to try and recreate this dream.
What I think the magic about this show is that there's no prescription about how you might interpret the exhibition. It's a personal journey that Trent Parke takes us on. Sometimes they're like little rooms of dreams, sometimes they're a surreal journey. But ultimately, it's about life. It begins a journey, and the artist takes us through that journey, through so many twists and turns, and we return to the point where we began. And that's what's so poetic about life, about Trent Parke's work, and this journey that he's taken us on.
Back in Newcastle, we call that the Diane tree. Pardon, I reply. We were all gathered around Ray and Christine's fire. The Diane tree, Christine repeats, pointing to a huge white gum tree at the edge of the yard close to our tin fence. Your dad was the first to build in this street and we were the second. As the landscapers were clearing the block, your mum come running into the yard. They were about to bulldoze the tree, which was only so high. She raises her hand to about the size of me. Your mum stopped them from knocking it down. She said it had to be saved. Ray and I were consulted and we agreed. My only proviso was that as long as Ray lopped it off each year, it was okay with me. I look up. The tree is now the tallest of all trees, towering above Ray's and our house. As you can see, Christine continues, Ray never did get around to lopping it all off. She pauses, looking into the fire. August 84. 3 boys under 13. She shakes her head in disbelief. We'll never forget that moment.
And so, at the end of it all, after travelling around the entire country and going through mountains and snow and trying to chase this answer down, here it was. The tree was always in the backyard, looking over our backyard. And all those mothers were right all along. Literally, here was the tree. Here's Mum looking over everything.
At the base of the Diane tree I stand. Once again I am thinking about time, how I have lived my life by the tick-tock of the unstoppable clock, continually racing through space and time. I search the black skies for one of the owls returning from the hunt. I marvel once again at how crazy it all is, chance, coincidence and life. All along, without even knowing, Mum's tree towering over our backyard and reflected in Dad's wheelbarrow. The words now replaying in my head. All those mothers, they were right all along. Of course they were. That is your mum looking over you. And soon, on the hill where the obelisk stands, overlooking the entire world, together, my brothers, my dad and I, will finally plant the black rose. And I will stand waiting for the light.